I should call you up, invest a dime, and you say you belong to me. Release my mind, imagine how the world could be so very fine, so happy together. I can't see me loving nobody like you for all my life. When you're with me, baby, the skies will be blue for all my life.
Hey, welcome back. Today's objectives are to differentiate between artificial and natural selection. Natural selection is a term that Darwin really emphasizes and coins to help him explain evolution within a species. The second objective is to identify Darwin's main arguments that species change over time by means of a natural process. In order to better understand Darwin's theory of natural selection, we're going to take a look at something that is the absolute opposite, which is artificial selection. Artificial selection is when nature provides the variation among the organisms, but humans select those that they find very useful. So if there are some wild pigs, and over time a farmer may capture these pigs and bring them back to his farm so he can start harvesting more pigs. What he might do is take his best female pig and quarantine it with his best male pig. And when that happens, he pretty much knows that he's probably going to get some pretty great offspring. So artificial selection is when the farmer chose which two pigs would mate just based on the characteristics he's hoping to get into the offspring. Alright, so to find an explanation for change in nature, Darwin had to study changes that were produced by plant and animal breeders. So he's looking for an explanation for why organisms in nature change. And he figures if he can explain why things in captivity can change, maybe he could get that mechanism that is going to explain why things in nature change over time. Darwin had no idea how heredity worked or what caused heritable variation, but he did know that variation did occur in wild species as well as in domesticated plants and animals. Darwin recognized that natural variation was very important because it provided the raw material for evolution. What he's saying here is, unlike the artificial selection that was occurring with the pigs who were being chosen by the farmers to mate, in nature, everything has equal opportunity to find and randomly mate with a member of the same species but the opposite gender. We talked about artificial selection, artificial meaning false, so it's when human interaction is there and they pick what organisms mate by putting them in confinement so other members of the species is no longer there. And we took a look at that. Now we're going to take a look at natural selection, which is the opposite process, which is the process that Darwin pretty much brought up, and it's his main argument on his theory of evolution. And natural selection is the process by which organisms with variations most suited to their local environment survive and leave more offspring. Now, this theory or hypothesis based on natural selection is very broad, and there are many smaller hypotheses built into this theory of natural selection. Natural selection occurs in any situation where more individuals are born than can survive, when there is a natural heritable variation, and when there is a variable fitness among individuals. Over the next couple slides, we're going to go over these three main points, and I'll give you specific examples of each one of these points as it happens in nature and the way that Darwin looked at it in nature. Alright, let's take a look at that first point. If more individuals are produced than can survive, that members of the population must compete. Darwin called this the struggle for existence. If there are more individuals than there are resources to live, then they must kind of compete for these resources to see which ones are going to survive and which ones are going to die out. And this was a point that Thomas Malthus, brought up in his book that Darwin read that inspired Darwin to think about competition. So in this picture, we are showing the struggle for existence. And we have a brown grasshopper and a green grasshopper. The green one blends in a little bit more, but we'll talk about that a little later. But what they have to compete for is habitat, water, and food. And because there are so many of them, whichever ones that are able to collect food and collect water and live in the habitat and stay away from predators, that one's going to be the one that is going to survive. The other ones will die out. The second point was Darwin hypothesized that some gene variants are better suited to life in their environment than others. He said that there had to be some type of natural variation that is passed down. So this point is all about variation and adaptation. Any heritable characteristic that increases an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in its environment is called an adaptation. The key is the ability to reproduce and survive. That's how, that's basically directed on how well you can adapt to a situation. So at some point we have some type of variation that occurred between the grasshoppers, the brown and the green, and the green ones are a little bit harder to see than the brown ones. So maybe that was an adaptation that had to happen, or that is some type of a gene variation that had to happen in order for the grasshopper to be better suited for life. So if I had to predict something here, the green ones are better adapted to their environment and therefore would probably survive better than the brown grasshoppers. So this one is showing variation in adaptation, which is Darwin's second little sub-point to natural selection. This last point is probably the most popular point that many people have heard of, and that's survival of the fittest. And basically what survival of the fittest means is that certain organisms have a higher level of fitness. And fitness describes how well an organism can survive and reproduce in its environment. So individuals with adaptations that are well suited to their environment that allow them to survive and reproduce are said to have high fitness. So survival of the fittest are the ones that reproduce because they're better adapt to the environment and they're able to outcompete other species, members of that species. Alright, so natural selection. In this picture we have struggle for existence. They're going to have to compete for resources. In our second photo we have variation, adaptation. We have two different colors. One of these colors is probably going to be better adapt to live in that ecosystem. And then you have survival of the fittest, because the green ones are harder to see than the brown. It has a higher fitness because the green ones are probably better able to reproduce and they're not going to be seen by predators as much. So that's survival of the fittest. So all these put together kind of help us explain natural selection a little bit and the components of natural selection. Remember that natural selection is when offspring, or not offspring, but the organisms or members of a species can mate on their own in a natural setting. So we've gone over a lot of things that Darwin believed was part of a natural process and also part of species changing over time. So now we kind of could put those together and say that Darwin's theory is evolutionary change over a long period of time by means of natural selection. Let's continue on with some more of Darwin's thoughts that kind of helped him support evolution by means of natural selection. And one of those things that he thought about was common descent. And according to the principle of common descent, all species, both living and extinct, are descended from an ancient common ancestor. Living species are descended with modification, so some changes from a common ancestor, and this is an idea that he called descent with modification. So as things reproduce over generations, there are modifications that happen, and these modifications are slight differences than those found in the ancestral species. So common descent kind of goes along with the aspect of Darwin's theory that implies that life has been on Earth for a very long time. He kind of called this a single tree of life, and it links all living things. So if you look at his little picture over here, this is the most ancestral species, and as time goes on, which is moving upward, certain organisms descend with modification. Every time something changes within the ancestral to the next one, there's a branch out. And this is his tree of life and how he links all living things. So in today's objectives, we differentiated between artificial and natural selection. Remember that the word artificial means false, so it's not what happens naturally. It's not found in nature. So artificial selection, like with the pigs, is when farmers choose his two best pigs to mate in order to get more very good producing pigs. Natural selection, there are many things that go with that. Survival of the fittest, struggle for existence, fitness, adaptation, all those things. And we pretty much went over that. Remember in natural selection that things reproduce naturally. There's no human interference. We also looked at Darwin's main arguments that species change over time by means of a natural process. We now call that natural process natural selection. And he kind of linked all organisms together by a tree of life, which he called descent with modification. If you have any questions, I know we went over a lot here and it's very complex, bring them to our next class.